Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our lesson for today. We are going to talk about imperial control, so different methods and ways that European countries and other countries uh, use to control some of the new territories they were gaining. So here's our objectives and standards to explain the way European countries controlled African nations, and we're going to look at a specific case of how the British controlled Nigeria, and take a look at the standards too. Okay, so our vocabulary preview, we have colony, protectorate, sphere of influence, economic imperialism, direct control, and indirect control. So I want you to think about this. So what can a country do to control another? So what are some ways that when a country takes control of another country, what are some things they do or use to control another country? And our essential question, how did European countries control African territory? All right, so like we said, we're going to talk about some of the different controls that Europe and places around the world used to control new areas they were gaining. So each European country had different means to control their territory in Africa, and there were also different ways that European governments could manage these new areas. So first off, I'm sure you've seen this word before, but colony, so a country or a territory governed by a foreign power is a colony. And an example of this would be Somaliland in Africa, which was a French colony. We also have a protectorate. A protectorate is a territory that has internal control, so they have control of their people and what goes on in their country, but they're under the rule of another country. So, for example, Great Britain and the Nile River area, which we're going to talk about later on in this lesson, but with Great Britain and Nigeria, this would be an example of protectorate. So they had control of what was going on, but they were still under the governance of another country. Sphere of influence. A sphere of influence is when an outside area that has exclusive trading or investment rights to the area. An example of this would be the United States and Liberia. We're not going to focus too much on the United States right now with imperialism, but the United States did have some imperialistic policies that they were imposing on other countries, and we'll discuss them a little bit later on in the course. Um, but an example for a sphere of influence would be the United States and Liberia, where the United States had certain exclusive rights with this territory. Economic imperialism, that's an independent area that is less developed, but it's controlled by a business or an industry. So it's not necessarily controlled by a foreign government, but it's controlled by an individual company or business. An example of this would be the Dole Fruit Company in the late 1800s controlled the pineapple business in Hawaii. So that would be an example of economic imperialism. All right, so let's take a look at indirect and direct control. These are two different ways that European countries or other countries could control other areas around the world. So let's look at indirect first. So in indirect control, local government officials are used. So let's just say, for example, Great Britain has control of a territory. What they would do is they would allow the local government officials to remain in power and to make decisions, okay? Um, there is self-rule, which self-rule means that the country or the territory can, make decisions upon it on its own. But there's very little self-rule. So they have, self-rule, but it's not extreme. The goal of this is to develop local leaders. So what these countries, like I said, for example, Great Britain may want to have done was help these local leaders learn how to control their country and make wise decisions. With that said, these European countries would try to promote European institutions and influence these countries or colonies towards the way of European life, but they would allow for the locals to make their own rules too and come up with their own decisions, like I said. And again, another example of this would be the United States and when we had our territories in the Pacific during this time. The United States also practiced indirect control. Okay, so for direct control, only foreign officials are used to rule. So the local people, the local governments have no say really. Foreign officials are used to rule. There's no self-rule, so like we said, for indirect control, when locals could make their own kind of laws and ways of living, during this type of control, they don't have any self-rule. So the goal was ultimately to make the territory more like the controlling country. So, for example, you see down there at the bottom, we have an example, France and Somaliland and Vietnam. France want to make those areas more like France, okay? Also, with that said, they were only going to promote European ideas and institutions. So they don't really want these, native or territorial ways of thinking going on anymore. They want these people and these governments that they're controlling to think and act like Europeans. All right, let's take a look at a certain case. So we have Great Britain and Nigeria. So, and why I'm doing this is to show you that it didn't have to just be one way. Like a European country or another country didn't just control a country in, one certain aspect. They could have different ways that they controlled throughout the country. So that's what we have here. Great Britain's control of Nigeria represented many different forms. So local leaders in southern Nigeria agreed to rule by the British for protection. So they had more freedom and a little more ways of ruling by themselves. Since they agreed to British rule, they were able to kind of do a little bit more with how they ruled things. Now in northern Nigeria, there's a little more like negativity towards British rule, and the Royal Niger Company, which I believe was involved in the palm oil business, controlled the Niger River Delta for trade purposes. So what I'm trying to get here again is that in a certain territory, you could have areas that had indirect control, like in southern Nigeria, which had more freedom to make its own decisions, or you could have more direct control and limit those people by how they ruled and what they did, with direct control if they were opposed to your type of rule to keep that territory area under control. Okay, so forms of control. So remember, there are many different forms and ways of control for imperialism. We talked about economic imperialism, the Protectorate, sphere of influence. There are many different ways and many different reasons for imperialism. And again, direct control and indirect control. And it could be a certain set policy, or it could be, the policy could be split up amongst the nation. And Nigeria, like I said, showed how many different forms of control could be used. You could have direct control in one area and indirect control in another. Okay, so that's all I have for this lesson. So please make sure that you submit the questions, and I will see and talk to you later.